Now,
which isn't
something
changed.
you've all touched on is the cost of living, and I'm sure there's going to be a robust debate on that. Just keep it clean if we can. So, much has been made of it and how to help the squeezed middle, as some people call it. So how will you do that, Mark Hutchinson?
Look, so there's two approaches to dealing with this issue, right? And National's one, which is to put tax across the...
I think he's asked about yours.
No, but there's two approaches. This is macroeconomics, right? If you put tax cuts into people's pockets, you will fuel inflation, which will cause interest rates to go up. The biggest harm to people that I've knocked on thousands of doors now...
It's an adjustment of the tax
The biggest
bracket.
harm to people has been the rent and mortgage increases that are caused by interest rates being high, mortgages being high. So, so Labour's approach is to do the opposite, which is instead of fueling the economy by shoving more money into it...
Isn't that what the Labour government's doing now?
Is to chip a bit of cost of everything, right? So we're
You're
chipping a bit off fruit and veg, a bit off
borrowed money.
Add cost
enabling
to
people to get their kids into early
fuel tax.
childcare means that some families will be able to have two people working, which is a massive benefit. So prescription charges off, and you know, people are now starting to wake up to this, and they're saying, "Oh, National's giving me a little bit with this hand, but actually they're taking away more." Where's the actual money going in the tax cut plan? It's going to the richest
the people that need it. We are giving, the prescriptions are going to be targeted
eaten
to
by
community
inflation in a
service
year.
card holders and super gold card
any
holders,
sensible
the people that need it.
in fact, any economist, and they'll say those tax cuts will be inflationary, they'll be eaten within a year.
Those are not, actually, by the way, I just want to clarify, they're not tax cuts, they are tax bracket adjustments, which will provide relief for people to inflation, because tax brackets have not been adjusted to inflation.
I'm not against tax bracket adjustments, it's just the wrong time to do it. It's the equivalent of you've got a fire in the kitchen and you tip fat and petrol on it. You don't throw tax cuts at an economy where you are just putting out inflation. It's the wrong
bracket
move.
adjustment.
Don't you think it's better money spent than giving free prescriptions, actually putting money to cancer to widen the net of
Absolutely.
of Pharmac?
So we've put $1 billion extra. We've put 51% extra funding, and we've committed to another $1 billion for Pharmac. So the thing about Pharmac, if you want to talk about Pharmac, is that it's important that politicians don't make interfere in decisions one drug at a time. Pharmac's job, and it works very well, and that's why the big pharmaceutical companies don't like it, is to make the best of what it has. So our approach is give Pharmac more money. There will not be more money for Pharmac under National's plan.
Okay, Martin.
Food, going and filling up your shopping cart at the supermarkets. We need one more competition. We need to get more of our homegrown produce, which is first rate, rather than exporting our best quality, keeping that in the supermarkets, and stop bashing our food producers with taxes on the food producers.
So you believe that from the food producers to the supermarkets, there's a big markup there?
It's why you always go into a supermarket, and why the fruit and veg always the first aisle you go through, because that's where they do their biggest markup. You are always channeled through fruit and veg before you get to the rest of the supermarket. Check in each supermarket you go to, and that's where they're doing it. And so that's why we've got to be looking after our food producers and not taxing them. So it's actually cheaper from source, that they're not being overboard, because they're ready to give up their lands if they're going to keep on being bashed by the big government who's coming in and saying that you are the bane of all evil, you are our polluters, you are our biggest polluting industry. We've got to be looking after our farmers. We've got to protect them because they are important. You are what you eat.
Julian, I suspect that you would almost half agree with what Martin's saying, especially on the lower food prices.
Well, I certainly would agree about supermarket competition.
Yeah.
And I would also agree that suppliers need to get a fair deal for their produce, and that we need to look at supermarket profits. I would agree on that. Are you asking me for more?
Yeah, so the cost of living crisis,
Yes.
how do you solve
Well,
it?
we will rebalance the whole tax system. At the moment, we have a situation where the people who earn the most, those 311 families that Mark talked about, pay an effective tax rate of 9.5%, which is less than half the standard rate of tax. And so we will rebalance the whole thing with a wealth tax, with a higher rate of top tax and with a lower rate of the bottom. $10,000 for everyone will be tax-free. There will be an income guarantee of $385 a week, with an extra $135 for solo parents, that for students and anyone out of work. We will make sure that the health service is much more affordable, one of the ways of doing that is to make sure that more health services provided in the public sector rather than the private sector where you siphon off a certain amount of money. We'll make sure that homes are more energy efficient so people are paying less for their energy. And there was one more thing which I've...
Well, you can get back to it later.
Okay.
Laurie, I think most people would agree more competition in supermarkets is achievable.
Yeah, well, I think our guideline was that I think it's Foodstuffs who own. It's actually owned by overseas companies.
Yeah.
So we don't actually own their own food industries. So the thing is, it's to look at those guys. If they're overseas, and they can just charge what they like. So you have to really have a look at how they structure their processes, how they structure their costing, and also it was about the banking industry. Also, we're owned overseas. Our banks are owned by overseas industries. We really got to look at that because these banks are just charging astronomical fees that they're charging more in New Zealand than they are in the countries that own the banks.
So you come from Wairoa. How do you help the average person in Wairoa who's struggling to make ends meet at the moment?
Well, again, it's about the food costs. As I said, those are the things you need to address. And I think one of the other things that we mentioned was the price of fuel, going over $3. Everybody's been talking about tax on fuel, tax on fuel, tax on fuel. But if there's, because all our fuel comes in from overseas, and if there's any sort of political going on in South China Sea or Singapore Sea, and those boats stop coming to New Zealand, we've only got enough fuel, I think it's for 5 or 6 days. So that was the whole agenda, was to get Marsden Point back working, produce our own fuel. It was sold to an Australian company who destroyed it.
So what
we really need to look at building our own. We need to make our own fuel in New Zealand.
What we need is more electric cars and not having the clean car discount removed.
Well, electric cars, nobody knows the batteries.
Arguably for Wairoa, what's going to reduce their cost of living is actually having services in their town. They don't have to drive out of town to go to the bank, to go to the dentist, to go to their choice of doctor.
You have no dentist.
You know, they don't have those services there. And so, the cost of living for them is making their services inaccessible, and they have to use their cars, and at the moment, mostly four-wheel drives for many of them to get out of the area. To be able to access those services. So, connecting them back with the services and bringing those services back into Wairoa would be a first step.
There's no dentist and one doctor. So another thing too was to get the infrastructure back. The roads, Winston Peters drove from Wairoa down here and he couldn't believe how shocking the roads were.
Well,
also, get the rail system back. It's not just about poor old Wairoa stuck in getting a hard time. We also got to start moving, to get out of Wairoa. As Katie's, we have no dentists, we have no doctor. There's not one bank left in Wairoa. There's a couple of ATMs. So we really need to start looking back and getting those small towns.
I'm a strong advocate for better public services too, but Katie, can you make a commitment now to what National will actually spend on improving services in Wairoa?
Well,
because I see a sinking lid on health costs in their budget.
That is absolutely not true. We have committed to year on year, but thanks for giving me the opportunity to say this, year on year increasing funding to healthcare and education. We want to prioritise the front line, and the front line is what's happening in Wairoa, and that's not what's funded now.
But also, it doesn't need to be public funded, it could be private. The dentist, if you encourage a dentist to go in there, either provide them with accommodation, make them part of the community, it doesn't necessarily come down to the bottom line of what their cost is. A private dentist would go back into Wairoa. It's just at the moment it's not that attractive to be a private dentist. That's the people coming here.
Now, Katie, one of the ways your party is going to fund the tax cuts is taking some of the budget away from benefits. So how are you actually helping people that are struggling on the benefit? How are they going to get through the cost of living
So I
crisis?
continue to say the best help they can have is help into a productive and high value job. Because at the moment...
So why does National never invest in that?
No, look, at the end of the day, staying on the benefit is not the best thing for these families. Being in employment is the best thing, and we are noting that there are so many people that are stuck on the job seeker unemployment benefit, and we need to help them off. And if we don't set targets for these, and like every other sector, whether it's healthcare or education, we need to set targets to get people off benefits.
Let me put it to you. Someone goes to work, having never worked, they go to an orchard to pick fruit and that. They get fired in the first day because they're just not up to it or whatever. What do you do with them then? Do they kick off the benefit?
No, absolutely not.
So what do you do?
They continue to get support. They get the training that they are required or that they need to have to get into a job.
They get an orange or a red or a green?
No, look, it's important to know that after 6 months, if they are continuing to avoid getting into work, that we will give them additional support. That is what this is about. It is a supportive social investment program.
What if that training doesn't help?
So if that doesn't help, then we need to get in there and help them manage their money, and we need to get them into community work, because they've got to get an entry level into that work, because it is a job seeker unemployment benefit.
So why, when in government, did National cut the training incentive allowance, which helped solo mums like Paula Bennett get off the dole
we are
and
going
into
to
Parliament?
Continue to support low-income
Judge
families.
politicians by what their parties do when they're in power, not what they say. Kate, it's easy to sit here and say everything's
like
rubbish
what you
and it
haven't
needs to be
achieved
better.
in the last 6 years?
But there is, yes, there's been a lot of, we've leaned into a lot of difficult change. It's not perfect, but we're heading in the right direction.
What's your take on this, Pavel, on getting people out of the cost of living crisis?
Well, I mean, it
pandemic,
starts
for
with
God's sake.
macroeconomics, like Mark said, except that the main driver of the inflation in New Zealand is wasteful government spending. The place has been flooded by borrowed money by the government,
tell us what
and this
spending
is
you'll cut,
why
Pavel. This is a great
Mark,
opportunity.
when too much money chases too little produce, because we've not increased our productivity, but we've printed a lot of money,
So, Mark's
Explain
got a
what
you
point.
you'll
get
What will you
price
cut?
increases. So
Explain
what
what
you
you'll
need
cut.
to do is you need to spend the wasteful spending. If your
What's the
spending
wasteful
was
spending, though? What
if
will
your
you cut?
spending
About
was of any
15,000
value,
admins in Parliament.
then we wouldn't have this
That's 3
inflation.
times
The
as
fact
you know
that
what-
we
Light
have
rail,
11%
30
inflation
billion.
extra
Okay.
pay
is
for
actually.
nurses.
One at a time.
Light rail
Can I
and
finish,
30
please?
billion.
No, but I'm just
The
saying,
fact
what
that
will
we
you
had
cut?
11%
Not one bit of
inflation
trade
can't
rates.
is a proof that your spending
You
was
can't just
wasteful.
say
What is
wasteful
the
spending
wasteful
unless you say
spending?
what you're
Because
going to
if
cut.
there was,
What
if,
is the wasteful spending?
like, if you
Light
spend
rail,
more
30
money
billion.
and produce more for that money,
Consultants.
We know
then
that, but
it's
what
not
would you
wasteful
cut?
spending and you don't get inflation.
light rail.
If you
a
spend more
consultant.
money to produce the same amount of stuff,
Martin, you were saying what
The
is wasteful
administration, I
spending?
mean, how many jobs were created in the Beehive or in Parliament for
14,000.
the admins? 14,000 admins.
Unbelievable.
How come we're going to,
what's
we're going to
happened?
specialists, or what do you call it, researchers, and saying, oh, we'll give you your opinion, because we haven't got opinion in the Parliament, so we will actually be having consultants, that's it, consultancy.
So I can
Yeah,
tell
I mean,
you what
we're
we're going to
spending
reduce.
61%
These are the
more.
people who say they're really
Katie,
good at
a
So
this.
look,
consultant.
what
I'm a
we're going to
consultant.
reduce is 6.5% of expenditure in most public sector.
Which is a lot.
And no, but look, it's important because we are saying that if those jobs, if those back office jobs are not directly impacting frontline services, then they need to be reduced. Because
Which
we
is
have
good,
seen an
but it's
inflation.
not going far
we
enough.
have
We
seen
need
an
to reduce the
inflation
spending
of support
to
services in
2017
Wellington
levels.
that are
Dishonest.
not helping the front
They
line.
won't say what they'll cut. They're saying they're going to leave it to the poor bureaucrats to
Mark,
do it.
of course
They've
we
said,
say
oh, we'll
what
leave the
we-
managers
what
in
we
the
cut.
public service do
That's
it.
the operating
Just
budget. That's how it works.
download
6.5%
our
is a
alternative
deep cut.
budget. It's on the website. It says what we're going to cut, and it's not going to be a single nurse,
But
single
articulate
cut,
for the people of Hawke's Bay now,
single
Pavel. What are you going to
dentist.
cut?
We're
What
not
will
going to
you
cut any
privatise?
frontline services. You've
about
made
cutting
it
emission
easy for
trading
us by
scheme?
accumulating all the wasteful bureaucracy in Wellington. That's what we're going to cut.
I think you'll find that there's a lot less wasteful bureaucracy than you'd imagine, especially after
No, I
the
disagree with that.
How are you spending
14,000?
60% more?
Oh my God.
What's your view on
How
this,
many of you
Julian?
have worked with CEOs of state sector organisations? I have.
I've
There's not a
also
lot of
worked.
spare
I've
weight.
also worked in
What does
local
that mean?
government
Okay,
and worked with
just want
government
Julian's
agencies
view
as
on
As a
well.
consultant,
I've done
I
change
have.
management, mate.
How
I
do you
would get
cut wasteful spending?
You'd be cut, Katie, because you're a consultant to the Hawke's Bay Regional
No,
Council.
I'm not.
Well, you were. You were a transport
That's it.
consultant.
She's changed
Well,
her
I
job.
think there's, several things
Lucky
I'd
they
like
don't have to
say.
cut me then.
First, I'd like to say to Laurie that to say, what have they done in the last 6 years? Nothing. I mean, if that's the level of political discourse, God
just
help
rubbish.
us. Clearly, that's not true. The other thing I'd like to say in terms of cutting wasteful spending is that people can't actually identify. ACT goes
Nobody
on
will
all
say
the
what
time,
we're
and
gonna
National go on all the
it's
time about
all
cutting red tape,
identified in
cutting
our
red tape,
alternative
cutting red
budget.
tape, as though red tape is somehow our enemy, and that red tape is automatically a bad thing, and that everybody out there will agree that we're really good guys because we're going to cut and cut and cut and cut red tape. What is this red tape?
So look, it's
tape-
over-
14,000 extra bureaucrats who do
Unhelpful
nothing.
I haven't
regulation.
finished.
Unhelpful
Well,
Red
regulation.
tape
The last
is
bonfire-
basically
One at a time.
regulations which set standards for things that need to be done. And I happen to know that those parties will be cutting regulations to lower environmental standards, to lower working conditions standards, and to...
Could you give me an example,
Juliet?
Juliet?
So in terms of wasteful spending, every organisation, including the government departments, including councils, clearly need to look at their regulations and their paperwork requirements in order to make sure that they're fit for purpose. They need to be looking regularly at their jobs. Do we really need to do this job or not? I'm not arguing that those things don't happen, but just to simply say we need to be cutting red tape, we need to be cutting wasteful spending, without actually ever identifying what their wasteful spending actually is. And I also think it shows a complete lack of understanding of what goes on in those back rooms.
Well, cuts didn't work so well for the Green Party
ETS?
because Labor has actually cut some of the climate programs as well without even telling James Shaw. What do you have to say about that?
Can we just finish on red tape before we come to climate, which I'm happy to do?
So, well, no,
we've
just
done that. We'll move on now.
On this point.
Yes,
yeah?
it's disappointing, I have to say. I feel as though the Labour Party is actually the only other party in this room that actually does care enough about the environment. But it is disappointing that Labour decided to do something to cut
climate change.
programmes.
I believe in climate change. I don't believe in climate crisis.
Mark, quick
Hello.
2 points.
So 2 points on red tape. The last bonfire of red tape that National brought us the leaky homes crisis by loosening up building regulations for their developer friends who were funding them back then as well.
Let's go into the future.
And they've gone on and on. And Katie still says she'll repeal the RMA. Under the Key government,
2.0.
for 9 years they didn't do anything about the RMA, and we have actually completely revised a very difficult area, and it needs to be given a chance. And I've spoken to RMA lawyers. It needs to be given a chance to operate now.
Do you know what? RMA lawyers have actually said that they're going to help us rework what it is that David Parker put in an absolute Frankenstein of an RMA.
It's terrible.
So if you go out there and talk to the people that absolutely underpin our economy, it is unworkable and we cannot operate on it.